Welcome to the Tech Talk by Microsoft EMEA. Today we have 1 hour for your questions about Microsoft solutions, Microsoft licensing. So feel free to ask your questions about Microsoft technologies. How to ask your question? You can use the chat on your platform where you're watching the stream and type your question. I will see the question here in my streaming dashboard and I will pick the question and answer this question. Till I'm waiting for your first questions, for a few words about me. My name is Manfred Helber. I'm Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center. And so my focus topics are Windows Server, Storage Spaces Direct, Hyper-V, Azure Stack HCI, Windows Admin Center. But for sure, you also can ask me about Azure and hybrid technologies. You can ask me about client and Office 365. And that not only technical questions, but also licensing questions are absolutely welcome. So feel free to use this hour for your questions and don't be shy, type them into the chat. And I will not repeat any names or things like this. So I only will repeat the question and then I will try to answer this question. Till I'm waiting for your questions, a few information about our next Tech Talks. So for example, on October 17th, we are talking about how to install Hyper-V. I would really recommend you to join this Tech Talk. And in October 24th, we are talking about remote desktop services configurations. And the next Tech Talk Q&A is on October the 25th. So these are the next dates. Today, we have the Tech Talk Q&A for your questions. What's also interesting, today the Microsoft Ignite starts. So if you are interested in news about Microsoft technologies, so actually, Windows Server 2022 is the latest Windows Server release because of, or based on the server release cadence of 2 to 3 years. I would not expect any news in the Windows Server area. But Azure Stack HCI, we are waiting for a new release there, the 22H2 version. Windows Admin Center, there we have a preview of the next version. Maybe we'll see some news there. Azure Arc is a big topic in the Windows Server ecosystem, and so I expect a lot of news about Azure Arc in the Microsoft Ignite. So if you are also interested in this news, go to ignite.microsoft.com. There you can register for Microsoft Ignite. It's an in-person event in the United States and in a few countries around the world, but it's also an online event. So it's a hybrid event where you can join on-site if you have an on-site event for Ignite, or you can join online. I will be in the Munich event for Ignite tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, on Thursday. And yeah, I would recommend you to review the announcements online in the online content there. Okay, actually no questions in the chat. This means yesterday announced in our Tech Talk where we deployed a cluster that I will spend some time today to show you how to manage such a newly installed cluster with Windows Admin Center. So still feel free to send in your questions because it's your hour for your questions. But I will use the time to give you some helpful information and insights about Windows Admin Center and management with Windows Admin Center. What we can see here is a Windows server. It's a newly installed Windows server. This server is joined to our domain. And this server will be used for the Windows Admin Center installation. So I will install Windows Admin Center on this machine. I downloaded Windows Admin Center Preview 2208. It's the latest version, but this one is a preview. And I want to go with you through the setup. So give you some information about how to install Windows Admin Center. I'm accepting the license agreements, and here happened something I don't like. This I have the setup of the Windows Admin Center in the country-specific language. You can see I have the Windows Server installed in English language here. Yeah, so it's Microsoft, computer name, domain, all servers. I always recommend you to use English. But because I switched to the region Germany, I'm based in Germany, the Windows Admin Center setup starts in German language. And what I will do, I will go to the language settings and switch to English. So I will preferred language will be English. So the preferred language is English, United States. I will use the United States here, and I will use this as my display language, and I will install this. This is online. So in previous Windows versions, client and server, you needed some language packs or things like this. This is now an online action, so you can just download it and it's installed here. So in the Windows Admin Center itself, we can switch back to English language. So this is only to ensure that the setup procedure is also in English. And then I will switch to the English language at the preferred. And to explain this to you, what here happened, I have English as my displayed language, but because I have chosen the region, Windows thinks, okay, this person is based in Germany, and so it installs the German language pack, and I don't want this on this machine to ensure that you can also read the single steps in the Windows Admin Center installation. If you joined later, again, the information, it's Q&A, it's yeah, your time. And for sure, you can also send feedback. Here's a feedback. You can always change language and region in the settings of Windows Admin Center. Yes, this is correct, but I wanted to ensure that the setup progress itself is also in English language. I will show you the language change in Windows Admin Center when it's installed. Now, actually, we have the situation, we have a Windows Server, we have the Windows Admin Center installer locally, and I want to ensure that the setup itself is also in English language. And this is the reason why I'm switching to English here. And this is my preferred one. And now let's check this again. I will start the Windows Admin Center. Now I can read, welcome to Windows Admin Center Setup Wizard. Yeah, preparing to install Windows Admin Center. Now we have this also in English language. This is why I added the language here. I will accept the license terms. Go to next. I will send required and optional diagnostics data to Microsoft, and I will use Windows Update to update Windows Admin Center itself. Windows Admin Center supports different deployment options. Here it recognized that it will be installed on a Windows Server system, and so it will be installed in the gateway mode. So several users can connect to this Windows Admin Center and use this here. I will allow the Windows Admin Center to modify the trusted host settings, and I want to automatically update Windows Admin Center. This is fine for me. I will use a self-signed SSL certificate and move HTTP traffic to port 443, so to HTTPS. Important is this certificate topic because you need a certificate for secure access to the Windows Admin Center and to ease the setup progress. Microsoft gives us the option to use a self-signed certificate for sure. This is not the preferred recommendation here. And so the situation is this is for testing, this is for demoing, and so on. Okay, let's install the Windows Admin Center. And this takes a while, the installation of the Windows Admin Center on this machine. It's a virtual machine. This can also be a physical machine. So the installation of the Windows Admin Center. When we want to access Windows Admin Center, we use a web browser, typically from a client. So I would use a Windows client on my client device and access this Windows Admin Center. To have an easy way to access it, I will directly use the web browser on the server, but this is not what you would do in the production environment. In the production environment, you would use your client after the installation of the Windows Admin Center and access to the Windows Admin Center installation remotely. Because it's a website, this is possible. You just use your browser, type HTTPS and the URL of your machine, and then you're able to access it here. Okay, so when the installation is finished, maybe you have been in the live stream from yesterday where we deployed a cluster. What we will do, we will add this newly deployed cluster to the Windows Admin Center. So let's open the Windows Admin Center. And here I was a little bit too fast. So actually the services are still starting. So I'll give the Windows Admin Center a few more seconds to start here. Then I will go to the page again. So this can happen when the services are still starting. So Windows Admin Center now is running. I don't want to read what's new. I already know the news in Windows Admin Center. So first thing when you installed Windows Admin Center is that you should go to the settings on the upper right-hand corner. And here we have the language and region. There we already had a feedback in the chat that we can change the language here. So if we would now move from German to English, we don't need to install a English language a Windows Server language pack like I've shown to you. But the situation here is it's really only for the Windows Admin Center itself. This is the language. Then also important, the extensions. The extensions are the different modules or tools in the Windows Admin Center. And as you can see in the installed extensions, there are several extensions where an update is available. The recommendation is to install these updates to be ready for the new stuff here. So I will install the cluster management extension. This is very important because I want to manage a cluster now in the next steps. And I want to install the cluster creation. We will not create a cluster. We did this yesterday in the TechTalk. But I will also update this one. We will not update the security center. We can do this later. And I will also not update the other things. Maybe, no, everything is fine so far. Okay, so I'm going back to the Windows Admin Center main section. And here I can add servers, Windows PCs, Azure machines, or clusters. And I could create new clusters, or I could add an existing cluster. And you remember we deployed this D201 minus S2D CL01 yesterday when you were in the call. And it says access denied. I have to authenticate. This is fine. And I want to connect with my account. To specify my credentials here again. And now the cluster and the nodes of the cluster are added. You can see here, I have the cluster and the two nodes, both together is added. So now we have a language. I will translate it. We have in an Azure AD cloud the ability to manage devices per group policies, or do we need a hybrid solution? So the question is, Is it possible if I'm using only Azure Active Directory, so it's not related to the Windows Admin Center demo here, is it possible to use group policies to manage, or do we need a hybrid solution? If the question is really, can I use group policies? Then the answer is we need a local Active Directory, because traditional group policies are not available in Azure Active Directory. But I think the question is it possible to manage the devices? And I know group policies could be used in the past. Is there something new? Maybe this is the question. And if this is the question, then for sure, I will interrupt the live demo about the Windows Admin Center and switch to the question, because it's the Q&A Tech Talk. I will open my Microsoft 365 portal. Let's check this out here. I will go to the Admin Center and switch the language to English, and then I will show this to you. Language should be English. English. One moment. So, okay, now we have the Microsoft 365. I thought we have the Admin Center in English language, but we don't have. Okay, I will not spend too much time in changing the language. I will show you it here and translate it to English. So what I opened here is the Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And in the Endpoint Manager, we have the devices. And in devices, we have the configuration profiles, and we have the policies, and we have, when we go, for example, to the configuration profiles, I could create a profile and look for settings for Windows 10 and newer. And for example, I want to go to the settings catalog, and I want to create this here. It's the name test, or demo. Now we have a lot of settings where I can send configurations. So I have administrative tasks, I have desktop. So who is familiar with group policies, then you will find a lot of your settings, but these are not the traditional group policies. This is important, and this is the reason why I was asking if I'm looking for traditional group policies. It's only possible in a hybrid configuration. If you want to have similar and even more configuration options, then you could use the device policies via mobile device management. And this is here the actual answer. Use Microsoft Intune or Endpoint Management and join the device to Azure AD. And then you can do this. It's perfect. We have this functionality included, for example, in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. This is a very interesting package where we have this functionality in there. So thank you very much for the question. It's perfect, because this is the reason why we are doing this Q&A Tech Talk. So feel free to ask more questions. And I will continue here with my Windows Admin Center configuration to fill the gap until you have some additional questions. And hopefully this answer was okay. If you say, okay, this Manfred, you didn't understand my question correct, then please ask again. It can always happen that I misunderstand something or read something wrong. Then please ask again. It's your time. But the feedback, thanks, tells me this was a suitable answer. Okay. Yeah, I will connect to my cluster here in the live demo environment. And you remember so absolutely new configured storage spaces direct cluster. And here I want to have a look at the configuration options of this cluster based on storage spaces direct in Windows Server. So the first thing is here, I can see the file share witness in the overview. And what I forgot to configure, sorry for this, yesterday, the last step was that we enabled cluster storage spaces direct. And I didn't do this, so I have to repeat this step here. This is yeah, let's say a fresh environment where this step is missing. We did this together. We went to the PowerShell ISE and we configured the cluster S2D. We'll do this here via the tools and the options. Enable cluster S2D. And then we have the storage spaces direct view in the Windows Admin Center. Here the disks are claimed. Fifteen, 16% is completed. The cache is configured. I will not have any cache in my configuration, my storage spaces direct configuration. If you were not joined to the call yesterday, to give you an impression what we are managing here, this is this configuration. So we are running an HCI configuration based on storage spaces direct in Windows Server 2022. And we did the cluster configuration yesterday in the call, and we finished the cluster configuration, and this was the planned content. But I mentioned if anybody is interested in seeing how to manage such a cluster, we will we will use some time today, if there's some time left beside your questions, to manage this new cluster. And this is what we are actually doing. This is what I'm actually doing. And so let's see what the installation does. Installation is finished. And when I connect now to the cluster, I have a different view here in the Windows Admin Center. I'm getting things ready here. And I have to authenticate at this cluster once. So let's talk a little bit about what we are seeing here. And again, to mention, use the time for your questions. It's your hour. So if you have any questions like this question about Azure Active Directory and client management or Windows Server migration, support life cycles, licensing, feel free to put it to the chat. If you prefer German than English, then write it in German and I will translate it. For sure, you can also place it in English language there. So the first thing is in the Windows Admin Center, I have the overview page. I can see if everything is up and running, if my servers are healthy, and so on. In the roles section, I'm seeing the server roles, and here I can see the SDDC group. I could add additional roles and so on. In the disks, I can see my disk drives here, my disk drive configuration, and I have my cluster virtual disk. And here we should run a refresh, because actually I don't have the full view. Now we have the drives. So here I can see my inventory. I can group these drives by server. So I will group the drives here by the server. And so I can see the drives in each server. I have 4 drives in each server. Actually, I don't have any data on the drives. And I can see the volumes. And in the volumes, I can see there's already one volume. It's the cluster performance history. The cluster performance history is responsible that we can see such performance data here, and not only for the actual hour, but also for the day, for the week, and for the month and the year. So this is stored in the cluster storage itself, in this cluster performance history. So we have seen the drives are nearly empty. We have 49 gigabytes used. It's some metadata in the cluster performance history. We could create another volume. Let's go to the inventory and create a volume. I want to create this 01 volume, and what I have configured is a 2-node cluster with storage spaces direct. This is the technology we have in Windows Server 2022 data center. And here you can see I can create a volume with two-way mirror. This means I have the original data and a copy. The nested two-way mirror means I have the original data and 3 copies, because I have a copy across the servers distributed and a copy locally. The nested mirror accelerated parity means I have a mirror across the servers and locally something like a parity, so it's comparable to RAID 5. What I will do, I will create a nested two-way mirror, and I will use a size of 1 terabyte. Or let's use 500 gigabytes. No, 1 terabyte is better. 1 terabyte. And I will create this volume here. When you are working with Windows Admin Center, the situation is that Windows Admin Center sends PowerShell commands to the target hosts. So the first action is Windows Admin Center sends create volume to my cluster. The cluster creates the volume, and then the Windows Admin Center receives the update. And this is the reason why we can see creating volume is successful. And a few seconds later, the volume is available. I will continue with the live demo in a few seconds. We have a question here. Is there a limit for joining Azure AD devices with a global administrator firewall rule number of devices from the same IP? We often have problems with the enrollment. After some time, it works again. So we have several limitations. So we have a limitation per user. It's a limitation. I'm not sure about the number. I can look this up if it's important to have the exact number. I assume these are 20 devices that can be enrolled per user. If we have reached this limit, we can go to Azure Active Directory and increase the number. So I'm running often in this issue, and the error message is absolutely weird. When I'm joining a Windows 10 or 11 client to Azure Active Directory, and I've reached this limit, then I receive a message that my password is not correct. This is reproducible. If you try this, and I'm not sure if these are 10 or 20 devices, I think these were 20 devices, then you receive a message, your password is wrong. And for sure, what you will do as a user or administrator when you receive the password is wrong, you will check if caps lock is pressed, or if you maybe forgot your password, or if you have a typo in there, or maybe wrong keyboard layout. Last step will be, if you have a new user, you will reset the password, but you will realize this will not work. So the error message is wrong. It says, or it states your password is wrong, but the reason is you reached the device limit. yeah, this happens if you have users with many devices. So I have really a huge number of devices and I'm replacing them very often. So I'm reaching this, yes, even with the global admin. So the global admin is on the same policy. This exactly hit me with my personal account, and yeah, I'm a global admin in this environment. I know this is maybe not recommended in huge companies or where you use different accounts. I use this account exactly for global admin and for device join. I now separated this, but I know from this scenario where I myself ran in this issue that we have this limit, and also a user that is global admin is yeah, forced by this policy. It's like policies. We had the question about policies in one of the previous questions. With the policies on site, the group policies in an Active Directory domain, we had the same situation that the domain admin could be forced by a policy to specific action. So it could be the per user device limit. This is one thing. Then you mentioned in your question that maybe it has something to do with the IP address. At Microsoft, there are also limitations for several things um, regarding the IP address. So, for example, when I go to portal.azure.com, maybe I'm logged in immediately. Yes, I need a in private browsing session to show you this. Portal.azure.com. No, azure.microsoft.com. This was my plan, azure.microsoft.com. Then we have the situation. I will show this to you. I will go to the English language page. Yes. And here we have an option to try Azure for free. This is only one example. We have several things. Also, when we try Office 365 or things like this, when we use the same network environment to access these services for the first time, Azure trial, Office 365 trial, but also some of the payable services, we are blocked for a specific time when we sign up with too many users. Especially for these free services, because Microsoft says, okay, what happens here? There's somebody trying Azure for free, and we would expect that a company tries Azure. But we don't expect that in one company, 100 users try Azure for free. And this is why this is blocked. I don't know such a blocker for device registrations. So, but I only wanted to mention this because it could be in your specific scenario that you hit one of these limits. And then we have the question about firewall rules. For sure, you need specific ports. I have to check if I find this ad hoc. There's a list for, let's see, firewall ports, Microsoft MDM device registration. Let's see if I can find this. Yes, here we have the network endpoints for Microsoft Intune. It might be that this list is too global, so that we have too many ports in there. And I will post the port here. Intune network endpoints. You will see this in a few seconds in the chat. This is the list of IP addresses and domains we have to ensure that they are accessible. So it might be that the network firewall thing is the issue. And so let's see, here's an addition. We use the USB stick from the Windows Configuration Designer. So the password is the right one every time. Yes, my remark about this, that the message is that the password is wrong when we hit this device limit. It has nothing to do with the password. It's a wrong error message. So this means in my scenario where I ran into this device limit, I was absolutely sure that the password is correct, but the message stated your password is wrong. So it didn't say you reached the device limit, or please remove a device before you can add more devices, or please change the policy. And so um, all your things you mentioned, is there a limit? Yes, also for the global administrator. Can this be firewall rules? Yes, here's the list of the requirements. Is this maybe a limitation based on the number of devices on the same IP address regarding the internet connectivity or internet access? This might be because I mentioned these limitations for the trials of Office 365 and Azure, but I wouldn't expect this. I have never heard about the number of device limit per IP address for the device registration, but I know about this limitation per user. Let's see if I can find this ad hoc. I'm not sure. Maybe we can find it here. Microsoft MDM device registration, device limit per user. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah, here we have the device limit. Let's see, Windows devices. No, it doesn't mention the absolute values here in the but I'm sure it's something about 20 or something like this. But here is the explanation how you can change it. Intune device. I will also bring the link to the chat. So I'm not sure if my information was helpful about this topic, so please feel free to add something about this. If you have any additional questions, I will wait a few seconds before I continue with the Windows Admin Center demo stuff, because as I mentioned, the Windows Admin Center demo stuff is only to use the time if there are no questions from your side. Today we had several questions, and I can see we had more Azure Active Directory related questions. This is great to see that you are using this new technologies. I can read yes, thank you. And the reason why I waited a few seconds is that we have some delay between what I'm saying and your reply. You're welcome. Thank you for your question, because this is the session for your questions. Okay, so feel free to type more questions. You can see questions are okay from each area out of the Microsoft ecosystem. I have a few technologies where I'm not the specialist. So for example, if you are asking me about Exchange on premises, I cannot say so much about this because I'm using Exchange Online since years. I was an Exchange professional, I would say 10 years ago. So I really used Exchange and administered Exchange very intensively and trained a lot of administrators about Exchange. But this was in times Exchange 2000, 2003, 2007, 2010. Exchange 2013 was the last Exchange version I was very involved. And then I moved to the topics on premises, infrastructure, Windows Server, Hyper-V, storage spaces direct, and hybrid. So for sure, I'm using a lot of Exchange Online, Microsoft 365, Azure services. But the great thing about Exchange Online is that I don't have to care about the infrastructure, and this got more and more complex in the past. Okay, so let's go back to the Windows Admin Center demo where I started. And you remember we created this volume 1, and where customers are sometimes a little bit surprised when they see, oh, this volume has a size of 1 terabyte and it consumes 4 terabytes. So the footprint, this is what the volume consumes, is 4 terabyte. But remember, we said we want to have a nested two-way mirror. We have a mirror, and in the mirror, again, a mirror. This means we have 4 times redundancy. We have 4 copies of each data, the original and 3 copies. And so we have a perfect redundancy. We have a 2-node cluster. We can lose a complete server, and we can lose an additional drive in the remaining server without any impact. For sure, we have impact because we have only 1 server remaining regarding the performance, but we don't have an impact regarding the service and data availability, and this is what's important. And if you don't like this, you can use the two-way mirror. Then you have a footprint of 2 terabytes for 1 terabyte total size here. When we now go to the drives, we can see, oh, we have some used capacity here because we created the volume. It's a fixed size volume. And when we go to the inventory, we can see 13% of the drives, the storage is used here. Yeah. So this is fixed provisioning. The volume is created. It grabs the complete storage it needs for this fixed size. And when I go to the volumes and the inventory, I can see the volume itself, it's empty. So the volume 01, this is the second one here, it's empty. It has actually 1% used, so there's nearly no data on there. For sure, we have our servers. Oh, I have a critical state here. Oh yeah, because it's consuming a lot of memory, so the servers are not offline or something like this. They are up and running, but they are limited in memory capacity, so they are consuming more than 50%. Let me see how much memory they have. These machines, they are running with 4 gigs of memory. This is not so much for sure. This is only in this demo scenario here. Virtual machines, this will be the workload we place on this cluster. So the typical workload on such a storage spaces direct cluster are the virtual machines. And when we go back to the volumes, we can have a look at the different volume types. I created this nested two-way mirror. For sure, I can also create a volume that is two-way mirror. Let's do this. Also 1 terabyte of size. And let's create mirror accelerated parity. This is where I mentioned we have a volume that has a part of its capacity as mirror and a part of the capacity as parity configuration. I will do this in a few seconds. So volume 2 is created. We are still waiting for the refresh here, or I can do the refresh manually. I have the volume 02 and can see, okay, it's 1 terabyte of size, but the footprint is 2 terabytes. Yeah, it's only 2 copies, the original and 1 copy. And when we go back to the volumes, we can create another one. And this volume is a nested mirror accelerated parity. Here we can decide the percentage of mirror and the percentage of parity. Let's do 30% mirror and 70% parity and create this. Now it's a little bit difficult to calculate this. And then we will see the footprint of this volume. So when the volume 3 is created, I will use the refresh button here, volume 3. You can see now we have a footprint for this 1 terabyte size of 3.3 terabyte. It's a copy across the servers and a parity locally. For sure, the parity efficiency increases with the number of drives. So this is for the basic management. Now we can see we have in the inventory more storage used and so on. Now we have a question. I can access the server using the app remote desktop connection, but using a remote desktop within Windows Admin Center will not work. Let's check this. When I go to a server, one of my 2 servers, I go to the inventory, and maybe I want to have a look at this cluster node 01, what's happening there. I mentioned this is running out of capacity. So I could go to this machine here and could say, okay, let's manage this machine. So the Windows Admin Center switches from the view of the cluster to the view of the server. And on the server, I can decide to connect via remote desktop to this target machine. And I will connect here. And here, this says, oh, Manfred, this is not possible because remote desktop is not allowed on this computer. So the remote computer. So a remote desktop is not activated. So I can go to the settings and I can configure remote desktop here in the settings page. So I will allow remote desktop and save it here. And now I'm able to connect to this machine. So I will go back to remote desktop. Here is remote desktop, and I will connect to this machine. And now the remote desktop connectivity will work to this machine. So it has to be enabled via the Windows Admin Center. Can also be enabled on the node itself. Now I can use the remote desktop connection embedded into this Windows Admin Center section. It's a little bit difficult regarding the scalability. This is the reason why I used the zoom factor here to ensure that we can see everything on this connection. So we have some additional information, works fine with other servers. Any idea? So I would check this settings option. So let's go back to the zoom of 100%. I would check the remote desktop settings here of this machine. And maybe there's an authentication issue. If it does not work, there should be an error here in the notifications. So it should say anything where I can see here my successful actions. There should be any error entry. And then I would work on this. First, I would check if the remote connectivity is enabled. So our TechTalk Q&A is till 12:30, so we have 10 minutes left. So I will again mention it's your time, it's for your questions. Thank you. We already had several questions, but it's also time for your feedback. If you say, oh, this was helpful, but my questions are most related to Office 365, Microsoft 365, Windows Autopilot, or things like this, then you can give me also feedback via the chat, and I will try to bring these topics you bring up in the chat to the next Tech Talk Q&As. Because as you have seen, we had time for your questions, and we had still some remaining time to do this Windows Admin Center demo to talk about some different topics. So if you have any topics you are interested in, feel free to bring them to the chat, and I will try to bring them to one of the next Tech Talks, not the content Tech Talks, because there we already have the content. The next one in October is installing Hyper-V, then how to configure RDS. But we have also a next Q&A on the 25th of October. And we have the installation of Active Directory domain services, Azure Stack HCI, and so on, Azure Arc administration. But we have several of these Tech Talk Q&As, and there you can we can also add some demos about your preferred topics. Yeah, here the situation is about the connectivity in Windows Admin Center. There are no errors. It tries forever to connect. So it tries to connect, but it's not successful, the connect, but there's also no error. So unfortunately, I have no idea here. If there's an error, usually it's an authentication thing or port thing or things like this. But if there's no error and no entry in any connectivity log, then maybe it's a little bit difficult to figure out where the issue is. Okay, so feel free to add your questions to the chat. I finished the Windows Admin Center live demo so far. If you don't have any more questions, I'm looking forward to have you here again on October the 17th. It's Monday next week when we talk about how to install Hyper-V and deploy virtual machines. It will be single Hyper-V host configuration because yesterday on Monday we did the cluster configuration. You will configure a single host, talk about the different network configurations, deploy virtual machines. So I'm really looking forward to have you there in the call. And for sure, 1 week later, also on Monday, the remote desktop services. This is very interesting because it's important to know about the situation about Office in RDS scenarios. And maybe I have some update there for you. So if you already have heard from me about remote desktop services, Windows Server 2022 and Office support, I would recommend you to join the session maybe on October 24th. There are already some new and updated information for you. So last 5 minutes for your questions. If there are no more questions, I will come to the end of this stream. But I know that we have the delay between your question you enter and my answers. So feel free to add additional questions, to add things you are thinking about. And as I mentioned, also your wishes for the next Tech Talk Q&As, because if there's some time remaining, I can do live demos like I did it today in the Windows Admin Center. From my opinion, what's still interesting to add here, maybe when I go to my cluster here in the Windows Admin Center configuration, then I can use the settings to configure several cluster-specific parameters. So about the cluster itself, about Hyper-V and other services. Here we have the storage, in-memory cache, storage spaces and pools, the cluster settings, the Hyper-V settings, and so on. We have a recommendation in the chat. Try to turn off the firewall on the remote server. Could be an WinRM problem. When I would expect an error if it's an WinRM problem or something like this, because there you should see, okay, tries to authenticate and it will not be able to authenticate successful. But for sure, it's always a good choice to check things like this. Please don't forget to turn on your firewall again, because it's not the recommendation to turn off the firewall. Best thing would be to configure or check the firewall rules for Windows Remote Management before turning it off. But thank you for the comment. But the feedback is WinRM is correctly configured. So this idea was already there. This was already checked. So maybe if you find a solution for your remote connectivity problem, let us know, and maybe you will find an error message in some event log till the next Tech Talk Q&A. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your questions. Hopefully it was interesting for you to see the demo about Windows Admin Center in the time where we had no questions. And I will close the Tech Talk Q&A here now and send you a few good wishes and hope we see on next Monday, 11:30 for how to install Hyper-V and deploy and configure virtual machines. And if you are joining the Microsoft Ignite virtually or in an on-site location, let me know. Maybe we'll meet there virtually or maybe on-site in Munich. So thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.